The alarm always rang at the same time, 6:15 in the morning, and Isabella already knew by heart the sequence of movements she repeated every single day. The modest apartment in downtown Austin was lit by the light filtering through thin curtains, revealing a living room decorated with simple memories, framed photographs of her students, textbooks stacked in the corner, and small vases of flowers she nurtured herself. The routine was almost a ritual. Freshly brewed coffee, toasted bread, and a cup placed on the mark of the table where she always left the newspapers. Isabella found comfort in repetition, as if predictability was her way of keeping life under control. On her way to school, the neighborhood woke up at different rhythms. Children ran with colorful backpacks, parents hurried through traffic, and the first rays of sunlight hit the walls covered in graffiti. Isabella liked to observe it all in silence, as if every detail was part of a mosaic only she could truly notice. At the public school where she taught first grade, her arrival was always met with spontaneous smiles and affectionate hugs. There was something about the way she treated her students, the patience with which she explained words and numbers, that made her more than just a teacher. She was a reference point, someone who made children believe the world could be bigger than they imagined. It was a simple life but not without meaning. Yet, on what seemed to be an ordinary morning, something began to change. The corner cafe where Isabella usually stopped to buy her cappuccino before class, looked busier than usual. The smell of freshly ground coffee filled the air, mixed with the murmur of conversations and the soft sound of background music. Isabella stepped in, adjusted the bag on her shoulder, and waited in line, distracted by her own thoughts about the day's to-do list. That was when she noticed the man in front of her. He wore simple clothes, dark jeans and a light shirt with the sleeves rolled up, nothing remarkable at first glance. But there was something in his posture, in the way he quietly observed the movement around him, that made him impossible to overlook. When it was her turn, Isabella ordered her usual, and before she realized it, the man had already turned to look at her. The smile he offered was cordial, without exaggeration, accompanied by a brief greeting. "Good morning. Are you a fan of their cappuccino too?" he asked naturally. Isabella smiled, a little surprised by the approach, but replied simply, "It's the best in the city, at least for me." The conversation unfolded almost improvisationally, between the counter and the waiting time for their orders. He introduced himself as Ethan, someone who, in his own words, enjoyed the calm of mornings before the chaos of meetings. There was nothing about him that suggested extravagance, only a polite man attentive to what she said. Isabella, so used to the objectivity of her school routine, noticed within herself a strange lightness during that interaction. When the barista called their names, Ethan stepped ahead and handed her cup to her before taking his own. The gesture was simple, yet carried a gentleness Isabella did not expect. She thanked him, and for a few seconds their eyes lingered, as if something unspoken floated in the space between them. Neither of them could have imagined, in that instant, how much that meeting would change the course of their lives. Isabella left the cafe and continued on her way, but the memory of that conversation stayed with her throughout the day. While correcting notebooks, she remembered Ethan's voice. While reading stories to the children, she recalled the way he looked at her, not hurriedly but with a rare attentiveness. There was something there, something that, even without a name, seemed to quietly plant a seed. And it was with that thought that Isabella, unknowingly, took the first step toward the question that would echo months later: neither of us was who we seemed to be. Subscribe to the channel and become part of our story. Like, comment, and share. It really helps the channel grow and motivates us to keep inspiring. And we want to get to know you too. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Time seemed to have found a different rhythm once Isabella and Ethan began seeing each other more often. There was no rush, no grand displays, only the natural flow of encounters that blended into routine. At first, it was the same coffee shop, shared on occasional mornings, until one day it turned into an invitation to the movies. Not one of those formal events with red carpets or luxurious theaters, but a simple Friday night screening at a small local cinema. Isabella remembered how he laughed at an unpretentious scene, an honest, unaffected laugh, and how surprised she was to realize she was laughing with him, in a way she hadn't in a long time. In the days that followed came strolls through Austin's parks, long conversations at sunset that always ended in comfortable silence. Ethan had a peculiar attentiveness to details, as if he wanted to discover not only facts about Isabella but also the way she perceived the world. He asked about her childhood, the reasons she became a teacher, the small dreams she had never confessed to anyone. Isabella, at first reserved, slowly allowed that space to open. She discovered in him someone who truly listened, and in that reflection she found herself lighter, less bound to the silence she had learned to carry. Weeks became months, and amid the simplicity of their meetings, their bond deepened. It wasn't expensive dinners or exotic trips that marked their relationship, but the repetition of small gestures. Cooking together in her tiny kitchen, sharing umbrellas in sudden storms, browsing bookstores while laughing at old covers. Isabella, who had always believed happiness hid in simple things, felt more and more at home by his side. Still, there was something about Ethan that escaped the ordinary eye. He seemed to always avoid speaking about his family, keeping his answers brief and vague. When the phone rang, sometimes he would hang up quickly, other times he would step aside to take the call. Isabella noticed, but she didn't insist. She had learned in her own life that everyone carried secrets not yet ready to be revealed. And in return she kept her own with equal caution, her past in the military tucked away in invisible boxes, like a parallel life that should never interfere with who she was now. It was on a quiet weekend evening that something unexpected happened. They sat on the small balcony of Isabella's apartment, side by side in simple chairs, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. There was no fine wine, only 2 mugs of hot tea. The breeze carried the scent of wet asphalt after a quick rain that had passed hours earlier. Isabella was talking about her class, about a child who had finally learned to read after weeks of effort, and Ethan listened with his usual attentiveness. But suddenly he fell silent and the space between words grew heavier. Without ceremony, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. There was no elaborate preparation, no rehearsed speech. Only a firm gesture, accompanied by a look that sought no approval from anyone but her. When he opened it, Isabella saw a simple ring. No extravagance, delicate, as if chosen to fit the unadorned life she lived. Ethan took a deep breath and said only what was necessary, that he could not imagine his days without her, that he wanted this simplicity to last forever. Isabella stayed silent for a moment, feeling her heart race with a rhythm that reminded her of youth, of a time when she believed love could be direct, without layers. She didn't need to think long. She simply nodded, with a restrained smile, teary eyes, and a whispered yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and in that instant, nothing beyond the balcony, the night, and the promise mattered. It was there that Isabella realized, with a clarity almost painful, that 2 completely different worlds were about to collide. And though she didn't yet know it, that simple ring was a prelude to inevitable clashes, to hidden truths that could not remain silent forever. The car moved down the long tree-lined road, carrying Isabella and Ethan to the Caldwell estate. With every passing mile, the simplicity of the city faded into an almost aristocratic landscape. The mansion rose imposingly, its classical architecture marked by white columns, impeccably trimmed gardens, and sculptures that spoke of generations of tradition and wealth. Isabella watched in silence, a discreet knot in her stomach, feeling the contrast between such opulence and the small apartment she had always called home. Ethan, at the wheel, kept a calm expression, but in his eyes there was a glint of caution, as if he sensed this meeting would be more than a simple family introduction. When they arrived, the heavy front doors were opened by uniformed staff, who greeted them with rehearsed formality. The sound of footsteps echoing on the marble hall contrasted with Isabella's delicacy, as she tried to move naturally amid the suffocating grandeur. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow her, as if judging from the moment she crossed the threshold. In the dining room, the table was set with almost theatrical sophistication. Silver candlesticks reflected the chandelier's soft light, and crystal glasses sparkled like tiny diamonds. Victoria Caldwell, the matriarch, awaited them at the head of the table. Her dark dress and impeccable posture radiated authority and control. The smile she offered Isabella never reached beyond her lips. Dinner began with cordialities but quickly turned into a succession of questions that felt more like interrogations. Victoria asked about Isabella's career, her education, the stability of being a teacher in a public school. Each answer was followed by a subtle, almost imperceptible remark, heavy with condescension. Isabella tried to remain calm, responding with honesty and dignity, but she felt that every word was measured, weighed, and judged. At one point, Victoria leaned forward slightly and asked about Isabella's family, her origins, what her parents did. Isabella answered simply, mentioning discrete memories, carefully avoiding subjects not yet ready to be revealed. Victoria, however, seemed unsatisfied. There was something in her gaze that searched for more, as if she sensed hidden layers beneath the facade of a dedicated teacher. Ethan tried to ease the tension, steering the conversation toward lighter stories, recalling trips, or speaking about amusing moments from his childhood. Each time Ethan tried to ease the tension, Victoria brought the conversation back to her meticulous dissection of Isabella, as if nothing she said or did was ever enough. The dinner continued amidst the clinking of fine cutlery and the invisible weight that pressed on the air. Isabella felt diminished, not by the luxury surrounding her, but by the way she was treated, as though she were an intruder on a stage reserved for a select few. Ethan's older brother, seated nearby, observed in silence, though the glances he exchanged with Victoria revealed complicity. Their father, distant and detached, limited himself to neutral remarks, as if preferring to step away from the silent battle that unfolded across the table. With each course served, Isabella realized with growing clarity that she was not merely a guest. She was being tested, evaluated, perhaps even dismissed before she could be truly heard. When dessert arrived, a flawlessly crafted tart, Victoria lifted her glass and with a deceptively light tone remarked, "It is admirable, Isabella, that you found happiness in such a modest life." The words hung in the air like a blade wrapped in silk. Isabella smiled, suppressing the retort burning in her throat, and replied with polite restraint. But inside she knew a battle line had been drawn. On the drive back, Isabella remained silent, staring out the window at the darkness blanketing the estate. Ethan squeezed her hand, attempting to reassure her. Yet she knew with painful clarity that the dinner had been only the opening chapter of a far greater conflict. The clash of worlds had only just begun, and the lines of war were already etched in place. The days following that evening at the mansion left Isabella with a strange unease, as though she had crossed an invisible border and now lived under the gaze of eyes that never closed. She carried on with her teaching, grading papers, preparing lessons, listening to her students' innocent stories, but between the simple rhythms of her routine, cracks of unrest began to show. Sometimes, during recess, she would step away discreetly to answer phone calls at odd hours. Her voice, usually calm, would shift into something lower, firmer, almost military. And when she returned to the classroom, her expression would change within seconds, resuming the serenity of the attentive schoolteacher. Ethan noticed the subtle deviations but chose trust over doubt. Still, he couldn't help but see the way she always kept her phone tucked against her, as if it were part of her own skin. She never gave detailed explanations, only vague smiles and short phrases like, "Just work stuff." He believed her because he wanted to. But Victoria did not. To her, every detail was a breadcrumb leading to something larger. Determined to rid her family of the intruder, Victoria Caldwell began a quiet campaign of sabotage. She called wedding vendors, shifting dates, creating confusion with deliveries, undermining the simple choices Isabella made with the little she had. The modest bridal gown, chosen from a small local boutique, became the target of disdainful remarks. The cake, ordered from a neighborhood bakery, suffered a mysterious delay after an intercepted call. Step by step, an unseen hand chipped away at Isabella's resolve. Yet she persisted. She continued to plan with quiet determination, as though the wedding was not about wealth or display but about carving out a space of belonging. Between lessons, she scribbled guest lists, organized flower arrangements, and tucked away budgets and notes in her school folder. To her, this marriage was not a contest of status. It was a chance to begin again, far from the ghosts that still haunted her. One afternoon, returning home, Isabella found an envelope slipped beneath her door. Plain brown paper, no sender, just a single typewritten line, "You can fool him but not all of us." Inside were clippings from old newspapers, reporting on overseas military operations. No names were mentioned, but the dates coincided with the years Isabella had disappeared from civilian life. She shut the envelope quickly, drew a steadying breath, and hid it deep inside a drawer. The past she had long kept under control was beginning to surface with alarming persistence. But the sharpest blow came from where she least expected it. One late afternoon, Isabella arrived home to find Victoria waiting at her door. Impeccable as always, the older woman wore a calculated smile. She claimed she was there only to talk. Exhausted, Isabella didn't argue and invited her inside. Yet the visit cast a long shadow. There was something in Victoria's eyes, a glint of triumph, as though she had uncovered more than she was ready to reveal. That night, Isabella could not sleep. She paced the balcony, gazing at the city lights, wondering how much longer she could keep her two lives apart. Ethan, weary from a long day, had fallen asleep on the couch. She watched him silently, fearing that one day he would learn the truth, not from her but from others. Meanwhile, Victoria advanced her plans with cold precision. She had quietly hired a private investigator, someone skilled at digging into records, travel logs, missions, names. With each report, Victoria felt closer to exposing the woman she was certain was nothing more than an imposter seeking the Caldwell fortune. The game was still silent, but Isabella could already feel the noose tightening around her. Deep down, she knew the past could not remain buried forever. And as though sensing its imminent arrival, a phrase echoed within her, until one day she appeared at my door again. The afternoon waned slowly when Isabella heard the firm knock at her door. The sound carried like an omen. When she opened it, Victoria stood there once more, impeccable, envelope in hand. This time there was no smile, no false courtesy. Only the rigid expression of someone prepared for inevitable confrontation. Isabella hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let her in. The silence that settled inside the apartment was heavier than any words. Victoria strode to the table, placed the envelope down with deliberate care, and sat upright, like a judge about to deliver a verdict. Isabella remained standing, studying each movement, until Victoria pushed the envelope toward her. "Did you really think you could hide who you are?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper, yet venom dripped from every syllable. Isabella looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. One by one, Victoria spread the contents across the table. Photographs, copies of records, fragments of military reports. Blurred images of women in uniform, censored documents, yet enough to suggest a connection. "You are not just a schoolteacher. Who are you really, Isabella?" Isabella's breath quickened. Instinct urged her to deny, to defend, but discipline kept her silent. These were not papers, they were shadows of a life she had buried, of missions that had depended on secrecy. One wrong word could endanger not just her, but others still bound to that silence. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. Victoria leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "On the contrary. I know exactly. You've deceived my son, made him believe you're someone simple, content with little. But I've uncovered the truth. You're hiding something serious, and I will not let you destroy our family." "You have no idea what you're doing," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. Victoria leaned forward, eyes locked on hers. "On the contrary. I know exactly. You've deceived my son, made him believe you're someone simple, content with little. But I've uncovered the truth. You're hiding something serious, and I will not let you destroy our family." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic outside. When she opened them, her gaze was resolute. "I owe you no explanations," she said, her tone sharp, "and I have nothing to hide from the man I chose to love." Victoria's smile was bitter. "If you have nothing to hide, then why not tell him? Why not confess what I've discovered? Perhaps because you know he could never bear the truth." The words dripped like poison. Isabella stood firm, arms crossed, unyielding as a sentry. The atmosphere grew unbearable. Victoria gathered the papers again, slipped them back into the envelope, and rose with the same cold elegance with which she had arrived. Before leaving, she stepped closer, her final words delivered like a sentence. "I will end this wedding. No matter the cost. He will know who you truly are." The door shut with a sharp crack, leaving Isabella alone in the heavy silence. She approached the table, brushed her hand across the envelope, and felt the weight of what it contained. It wasn't just documents, it was the life she had tried to bury. A past that would never fit neatly into family dinners or hallway conversations. She sat on the sofa, her eyes fixed on nothing. The silent battle she had been waging with herself now had an open enemy. Victoria would not stop. And although Isabella had faced far more dangerous scenarios in her past, she knew this confrontation would be different. Courage alone would not be enough. She would have to resist without revealing a thing. The envelope, now closed, remained on the table like a constant threat, a reminder that the past was about to resurface. Isabella took a deep breath and murmured to herself, almost as a promise, "Safety first. Always." The morning of the wedding arrived cloaked in deceptive calm. The clear sky over Austin seemed to announce a new beginning, but behind the apparent serenity lay a tangle of invisible tensions. Isabella woke early, looked out at the city slowly coming to life, and inhaled deeply, trying to shake the feeling that something was about to collapse. In her mind, she repeated like a mantra that this would only be a day of love, of simple promises, of true union. But reality would soon reveal a different face. The first signs appeared in the early hours. The florist called, confused, saying the order had been cancelled the day before, supposedly at the bride's request. Isabella, surprised, insisted she had never made such a request. She checked her notes, confirmed the payments, but the misunderstanding had already cost precious time. Shortly after, the baker called to inform her that the cake would not be delivered because someone had withdrawn the deposit and closed the order. Isabella, stunned, felt her heart race. The pieces of a dark puzzle were beginning to fall into place. As friends rushed to improvise solutions, new problems arose in succession. The hired musician claimed he had been dismissed, chair suppliers vanished from the schedule, and even the seamstress for the dress complained of mysterious delays in fabric delivery. Each obstacle, small on its own, formed a suffocating chain that weighed on Isabella. She recognized in it Victoria's invisible hand, cold and calculated, fulfilling her promise to destroy the wedding. Despite the chaos, Isabella remained firm. With the help of colleagues and close family, she reorganized part of the ceremony in just a few hours. The dress arrived on time, albeit with hurried adjustments. Flowers, gathered from local markets, made simple arrangements, different from the original plan but full of meaning. Everything seemed sustained by improvisation and sheer willpower. And yet, there was a sparkle in her eyes, a determination that revealed she would not be defeated. As guests arrived at the small chapel they had chosen, conversations revealed confusion. Some spoke of last-minute changes, others noticed the absence of promised details. Isabella, however, focused on what mattered most. Ethan was there, smiling, dressed in his suit with understated elegance, ready to say "I do" in front of everyone. Yet beneath his composed exterior, he too sensed the growing tension. And then, just as the reverent silence settled and the first notes of the improvised music signaled the bride's entrance, the chapel door burst open. Victoria Caldwell appeared, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. The murmurs among the guests turned into a nervous buzz. Victoria's gaze was full of triumph, as if she had finally set her final blow in motion. The officers advanced with firm steps, approaching Isabella. The scene seemed like a tear in the fabric of reality. The bride in her simple dress, surrounded by improvised flowers, standing before men who represented the law. Victoria raised her voice, clear and commanding, accusing Isabella of being an imposter, a woman hiding a dark past to infiltrate the family. Her words struck like verdicts, leaving the audience in shock. Isabella remained still. Her heart pounded, but her face showed no panic. She knew this was the moment everything would become unsustainable. The secret she had kept for years was on the verge of being exposed. Eyes turned toward her, some filled with doubt, others with compassion. Ethan, stunned, looked from his mother to the woman he loved, unable to grasp immediately what was happening. In that instant, time seemed suspended. The ceremony, meant to be the pinnacle of a union, had turned into a stage of public accusations. Isabella inhaled deeply, her eyes reflecting a mix of pain and resolve. The truth was about to surface, not by choice but as an inevitability imposed by fate. The silence that followed Victoria's and the officer's entrance was almost absolute, as if the very air of the chapel had compressed around Isabella. Every eye present focused on her, awaiting a reaction. She stood tall, breathing steadily, lips firm, body tense, mind clear. She knew she could not give in to panic. Any thoughtless gesture could make the situation worse. And then, one of the officers' voices cut through the silence. "Major Isabella Torres, active military service at your disposal." The words sounded like a thunderclap. Murmurs among the guests rose, mixing surprise and disbelief. Isabella felt immediate relief intertwined with restrained emotion. The truth was finally in the open, no longer as accusation or suspicion, but as formal recognition. She stood still for a moment, absorbing every reaction, every gaze that now shifted from doubt to respect. The officers stood at attention, saluting her with precise military form. The gesture, brief and exact, resonated through the hall, creating an aura of solemnity that instantly changed the room's dynamic. Guests, previously tense and suspicious, now looked at Isabella with admiration and amazement. Ethan, teary-eyed, approached slowly and finally understood the depth of what the woman he loved had silently carried. Victoria, meanwhile, froze, her rigid features of arrogance replaced by confusion and disbelief. The control she had always maintained seemed to slip from her hands. Sensing the change, Isabella took a deep breath and began to explain, firmly yet calmly, her military past, the secret operations, the missions carried out in dangerous territories, and the necessity of keeping everything strictly confidential until that moment. Each word revealed a truth no one could question. Ethan held her hands, looking into her eyes, and in a gesture of support declared that he knew of her courage, trusted her, and that no secret could ever shake the love he felt for her. Yet Isabella still wanted to explain why she had not revealed her past. She began by saying she had led many missions in dangerous territories, dealing with powerful enemies, and that on numerous occasions, threats had been directed not only at her but also at her family. Her identity had long needed to remain secret for safety. Leaders of dangerous organizations were determined to discover who had led the missions that dismantled their operations. She concluded by saying that now, alongside Ethan, she felt safe and could finally reveal the past that had haunted her for so long. A veteran uncle who had followed part of Isabella's career stepped forward and publicly validated her story, confirming the truth of her achievements, decorations, and the secrecy she had maintained for years. Respect for Isabella's past transformed tension into reverence, and the atmosphere of conflict gave way to collective emotion. Victoria stepped back, silent, unable to find words to justify her actions. The entire audience had witnessed the turning point, and Ethan's mother felt her first defeat in the face of the truth. Isabella remained steadfast, but the gleam of relief in her eyes betrayed the weight that was finally lifting. What should have been a humiliating accusation had transformed into recognition. Slowly the guests began to applaud, not loudly but sincerely, acknowledging Isabella's courage and integrity. Every inch of doubt and criticism was replaced by admiration and respect. Ethan, tears in his eyes, held her hands tightly and smiled, finally free from the fear of losing the one he loved. The military past Isabella had kept hidden had become, in that instant, a bridge to understanding and unity. Isabella then walked toward Victoria, who watched her unsure of how to react. Calmly, she approached and firmly said, "It was never my intention for you to judge me. But now you know who I truly am." Victoria lowered her eyes, her rigid posture yielding to the weight of the truth. A silent apology began to emerge in the air, still unspoken, but recognizable in her restrained gestures and changed expression. The atmosphere in the chapel shifted completely. Fear, doubt, and tension gave way to clarity, honor, and acceptance. What could have turned into an absolute disaster became a quiet celebration of character, courage, and love that had withstood every obstacle. Isabella took a deep breath, finally feeling the freedom to live her story without hiding anything, ready to turn that moment into the beginning of a new chapter. The sun rose slowly over Austin, illuminating the small chapel transformed into a scene of celebration and emotion. The tension that had marked the start of the day had been replaced by a sense of harmony, as if every detail conspired to seal not only a union but also the overcoming of old, invisible conflicts. Isabella and Ethan, hand in hand, walked down the central aisle, receiving looks of respect, admiration, and affection. The presence of the family, now less rigid and more open, completed the scene of transformation that the day had provided. The wedding was simple yet full of meaning. The honor guard, composed of veterans who knew and respected Isabella's journey, made the moment solemn and moving. Every step she took, every smile exchanged with Ethan, symbolized the triumph of truth and love over prejudice and external expectations. The ceremony, though different from what had been originally planned, carried an authenticity that no extravagance could surpass. Every gesture, every word, was imbued with sincerity, reflecting the real-life Isabella and Ethan were building together. Victoria Caldwell, initially distant and rigid, approached hesitantly. The transformation in her expression was visible. Pride and arrogance gave way to timid understanding and belated recognition. Extending her hand to Isabella, she spoke in a low but firm voice, apologizing for her premature judgment and attempts at sabotage. The words, though simple, carried weight and sincerity, and Isabella acknowledged them with a calm nod, recognizing the gesture of reconciliation. Forgiveness was not just an act of kindness. It marked the culmination of an emotional shift that would open the door to new relationships within the Caldwell family. The celebration that followed required no luxury or excess. What shone was genuine joy, shared laughter, and affectionate glances among those who finally understood the depth of the bond between Isabella and Ethan. Close friends and colleagues gathered, celebrating not only the couple's union but also Isabella's courage in maintaining her integrity in the face of such complex challenges. Every story told, every memory shared, reinforced the understanding that true love is built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. Months later, the couple's daily life returned to its natural rhythm, now strengthened by the events that had transformed their relationship. Isabella resumed her routine as a first-grade teacher, teaching with the same dedication and passion that had always guided her career, now with renewed confidence. Ethan, by her side, supported her in every decision, participating actively in small daily moments, learning that true wealth lies in shared experiences and connection, not in material possessions or appearances. Victoria, transformed by the experience, found purpose in volunteer work at the Veterans Hospital, offering support and companionship to those who, like Isabella, had dedicated their lives to military service. The encounter with these veterans, the humility of their stories, and the silent strength they carried, changed Victoria's perception of the world and the people around her. The bond between the families strengthened. Ethan and Isabella maintained balance between their personal routines and family life, creating moments that celebrated small victories and everyday joys. A story that began with secrets and judgment evolved into a chapter of understanding, respect, and genuine love, showing that true power lies not in appearances but in acting with integrity. And at its core, the clearest lesson remained in the memory of all who witnessed this period. One must not judge others by appearances. The courage to be true to oneself, even in the face of adversity and prejudice, transforms lives and redefines relationships. Isabella and Ethan, now united, moved forward, aware that every challenge overcome strengthens love and trust. Thus, the story of a former soldier, now a humble teacher, and a billionaire businessman found its true meaning, not in wealth or status but in authenticity, forgiveness, and the capacity to connect deeply and genuinely with another person. Daily life continued, but the impact of what had happened remained quietly powerful, reminding everyone that appearances can deceive, but the truth, once revealed, has the power to unite, transform, and inspire. Another emotional story here on Enchanting Stories. If this story touched your heart, surprised you, or if you simply love narratives that move the soul, you know what to do. Give it a thumbs up to show that the magic of storytelling really works. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, because our community is growing every day, and you won't want to miss being part of this passionate storytelling family. Here, every video is an invitation to dive into worlds full of drama, emotion, and twists you won't forget. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. So come join this enchanted family, like, share, and get ready. We still have many stories that will touch your heart, make you sigh, laugh, and be amazed. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video here on Enchanting Stories, where every story is an invitation to fall in love all over again.